Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this educational series titled Supply Chain 101 by Pencils and Pistons. This amazing series that we have been running in collaboration with Sandeep Sir has been exciting, and I hope that's exactly how I feel about it. I hope you all felt the same too. So, welcome once again, Sandeep Sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I think every day I look forward to this because that is where I think I get a lot of satisfaction out of it. And again, thank you for doing this because again, it's open source and I think it should be accessible for everyone and nobody should be left out just because they cannot pay. So thank you once again for this.
Thank you so much, sir. Your support throughout has been very, very encouraging, and I'm really glad that we are here. I hope that we can always do great things together. Today is the last episode in our series Supply Chain 101, and it's basically based on the topic inventory management, which is like we were just talking. It's not an easy thing. The problems do remain the same, like you said, but then again, there is so much variation that is possible. Uh, so I think let's just get started. No point in waiting at all.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the most important question. Why exactly do we need a separate discussion on inventory management? Kind of will set the context of this conversation.
See, I think again a great question because people think that inventory management anyway it's built in procurement, it's built in manufacturing, it's built in sourcing, it's built in logistics. Why do we need a separate thing? But if you look at it, at the end of the day, we buy items, we store items, we manufacture items, we sell items. So that's the heart. So, and if you look at it, if it stops function, if there is no, suppose there is no inventory, I think all this, lot of our problems will be solved. So that's why I think that warrants a very separate discussion for inventory management. And that's mostly for your tangible goods. But for services, again, service, you don't have an inventory. But if I look at it, the way we do it is you generate capacity. For example, your manpower is what enables your services, and you need to have sufficient manpower so that you can deliver the service. So an indirect way of storing service inventory is actually you are keeping manpower. So though there is no direct inventory, but that is how I will relate. And I think no other topic in the world has warranted so much attention than inventory because from when man was born, he used to store materials because there was scarcity. We did not have enough storage capabilities. So inventory was always there. And reams of paper have been actually used in finding a solution that, oh, my balance sheet shows so much inventory. How do I reduce it? And that's why the people spoke about lean, people spoke about Kaizen, people spoke about Lean Six Sigma, people spoke about MRP, people spoke about ERP, people are now talking about demand driven MRP, people are talking about theory of constraints. All this is just because we have this one, I think even not a more than that, more than $1 billion problem is inventory. How do we manage it? How do we track it? How do we do something about it?
Yes, exactly. How do we do something about it? I think that very easily flows into the next question I had in my mind, that what are some most important or most used inventory management techniques that are in practice?
Now, if you look at it, why do we need inventory? Ideal case, you have a demand, and in the ideal case, if you could fulfill that in say 1 hour, 2 hours without keeping any stock, that's the ideal way. But if you look at it, the customer today is spoiled for choice. I give this example again and again because in the 1980s, when you wanted to buy a Bajaj scooter, there was a waiting time for 18 months. 18 months. And the customer was willing to wait for that because they did not have a choice. Customer was okay with that. But now, if you look at it, we have moved so fast, and The manufacturing and procurement lead time has not reduced so much, but the customer tolerance time has reduced drastically. The customer doesn't want to wait. A part of it, we are responsible because we are spoiling the customer, but the counter to this is if you don't do it, somebody else will. So that's the reason that since we are talking about fulfillment time in minutes, in seconds, in hours, we need to have inventory. And that's where again the question comes is if you talk to the finance guys, they said, no, you are actually storing so much inventory. My cash is tied up. My working capital is really needs are very high. Why do you actually need it? Anyway, you are not using it. Then there's an inventory aging. So if I look at it, people have tried multiple ways of reducing it. So the time and time tested economic order quantity, again, that was primarily used to how much you actually procure. But a lot of times I get this question from students that nobody uses EOQ. Why do we study it? I said, yes, nobody uses EOQ now in that sense. But if you look at it, there is a probabilistic approach to EOQ. You look at what is the probability of this occurring. You will definitely look at your carrying cost. If you definitely look at your order quantity, EOQ in a different flavor, not the textbook what we have it. So I call it as a probabilistic model of EOQ. And again, there's so much of research which has been done in doing that. Now, in terms of inventory management, the most basic rudimentary thing which works, min-max planning. You decide on that this month I will store this. This will be the minimum. This month the maximum, and moment it reaches that level, I will go and order. It's automated. Now this works very well if I have a low value item because I really don't care. But if it is a high value item, I think min max will not work because then you're actually holding too much of very high value inventory and that blocks your capital. So the next improvement was a reorder point that actually took into account the demand and the demand lead time. But that's again it's still rudimentary because I say that you cannot really forecast your demand accurately. So you still need to have a probabilistic model. And a lot of times I hear that why do we use statistics? Statistics anyway is a lie. Yes, even human beings, we don't know whether we are going to survive tomorrow, but we still need to plan somewhere, right? So that way, I think probability that I look at my past, I look at a model and say that this is the most likely, because unless, see, always a bad plan is still better than a no plan at all. So that's why still feel that the probabilistic model is still okay. So again, the reorder point planning, which has been again very, companies still use it. But again, the textbook is definition may not suffice. You still need to have a probabilistic approach. The third, which I have seen is people look at a lean. Lean is nothing if I say it's a two bin or a kind of a thing where you only there are signals on your shop floor, and it came through Toyota manufacturing system where you say that there's a signal, visual signal, which goes that if my bin is below this level, it should get replenished. Again, works very well, but again, for high value items, it may not work. And now we have the most sophisticated algorithms where it says we are using advanced supply chain planning coupled with a demand planning, where actually we plan for whatever is needed at what time, at in what quantity, and at what position. But having said that, please understand that zero inventory is a myth, because a lot of time people say just in time. Just in time is okay, but you still need to have inventory, and don't just move your inventory to your suppliers and say that I have zero inventory, because you have just moved the risk somewhere. But supply chain, if you look at it, it has to be looked together. And if I'm looking at a supply chain together, it's your supplier and yours inventory together. You still have not solved the problem. So as a result, what is happening is people have now moved to that. They do a analysis of which stock to keep, where to keep, how much to keep. So that way, I think a lot of, in fact, the demand-driven MRP is actually a lot of companies are trying it out. Again, it's not yet fully proven. But having said that, just because forecasting is wrong, should not happen that I will not forecast. So demand-driven MRP still looks into forecast to create your buffer sizing. It may not actually forecast, but you still use a forecast in some way or the other. So let's see, hopefully DDMRP will actually solve some of our problems. But again, even I don't know at all, 100% of the inventory problems will never solve, because whenever I speak to customers, I get to see the similar problems, newer ways of trying it out, but the problems have more or less remained the same.
Correct. In fact, that kind of brings me back to the thought process. So when I was actually researching on supply chain control towers, this is what I was asked time and again. You can probably use high-end technology stack like the control towers in the execution arm of the supply chain. How do you think that complements in the planning side of the supply chain, in demand planning, forecasting, inventory management? Like you said, there are some sophisticated algorithms now that have moved way beyond economic order quantity, and yet we cannot completely eliminate that substantial risk that exists. And I really love the point that you mentioned about they talk about just in time, but it's just like basically the nucleus organization kind of shifting the risk at the suppliers and instead of their end, and call it like a zero inventory just in time. I think in general, for pretty much every little topic in supply chain, we need to look at supply chains as like an entire system end to end. And if you're able to reduce an inventory end to end, I think that will be the appropriate use of technology if you ever get like a solution that accurate. But again, these are all interesting conversations, and I'm pretty sure we're not the first people having this conversation, and we won't be the last people having this
Absolutely,
conversation.
absolutely.
Right. So I think that's exactly why inventory management is like an all the time recurring conversations per se. You mentioned about demand driven MRP. So I think this is the right time to talk about in general what exactly it's a concept note of an MRP one, and then MRP2, which is a demand driven MRP. And let's just try to understand here so that how does it connect to the demand planning, capacity planning, and the customer service level, how it kind of ties all the knots together.
I think that's a great question. See, again, I will just put it this way: MRP1, MRP2. There's a lot of confusion around that. So if you look at it, Orlicky wrote his first book on MRP way back in the 70s, and that's the birth of the material requirement planning. So how did MRP come into picture? Now, if you look at it, earlier days, people used to have a pen and paper and say that if this is my finished goods, to produce this finished goods, I will need this semi-finished good. To produce this semi-finished good, I will need another level, and so on and so forth. So because the number of products were less, the number of components were less, some were bought, some were assembled, some were manufactured, it was actually manageable. But then after the World War II, when we started building our economy, rebuilding our economy, that's where Taylor's scientific management came in, that we had time and motion study. So we started actually growing exponential. That was the period of exponential growth. So that's where people realize that a pen and paper is not sufficient. So I have so many SKUs, and some of them have common components, and people were really going mad. So that's where I think people built a very rudimentary. Again, I will not. Rudimentary is not in a derogatory term, because do understand that whatever we are, that was the foundation. Had that foundation been not laid, we would have been nowhere. So that's where we actually developed a computer algorithm was developed, and then what happens is bomb explosion. Now again, don't get confused with bomb explosion. Bomb, people think it's something else. It's nothing but it's basically, if I have to make one chair, I need so many parts, and each part will again have subparts. So I will actually break it up into multiple levels. That we call it as a bill of material exploration. And bill of material is again nothing but it's a bill in the sense, it's not that, if you look at it, don't confuse it with the invoice or something. It's like a paper which says that to produce this, I need so many at so many levels, so many quantities. Now, as companies were struggling to actually arrive at how much they need, the MRP, the material requirements planning was done, where we explode a bomb and we find out that how much of quantity at what point of time do we need. So the end result of a MRP was either a work order or a discrete job or a shop floor job, whichever way you call it, or a purchase requisition. But MRP1 was working fantastic, but then people started understanding that MRP assumes that I have infinite material. There is no constraint. But if you look at it, every second we operate under constraints because life is all about how you handle this constraint. So that's where MRP2 was born in the 1980s. So that's MRP is manufacturing resource planning. MRP1 is material requirement planning. MRP2 is manufacturing resource planning. So MRP1 feeds into MRP2, where you take into account the constraints that I have so much of resource constraint. I have so much of budget. So that's where I think it has a bearing with other functions. And that's how MRP2 was born. And the today's ERP, when you see it, today's ERP is nothing but born out of MRP2, where you have an integrated system, where you have constraints in place, where you actually have a cross-functional thing. So that's how MRP2 was born. Now, once the ERP started coming in, people understood that this was also not enough because MRP2 again assumes that you have a forecasting process. Forecasting is pretty accurate. And we all know that forecasting is never accurate. So that's where actually people have been trying to find out newer ways. So that's where theory of constraints was born again. Goldratt one stalwart, I think. I will strongly encourage people, even from a non-SCM background, to read The Goal because that's a story book and you will love reading it. He has actually put across a problem and a solution like a novel. It's a very good read, and every time I read it, I get a new dimension. I think that's again one of the Bible, even for everybody. I think everybody in the world should read that. So that's where theory of constraint, they started looking at flow. So from MRP2 assume that you have constraints, but there was no flow because you must have seen a typical case that I have three machines. One machine is the slowest one. So because that cannot process at the same speed as machine one and machine three, inventory starts piling up. So that becomes your bottleneck. So that's where theory of constraints came in. So that solved a lot of our problems, but then people started to address the problem that this was also not enough because forecasting was wrong. We should have more real-time demand sensing. So that's where demand-driven MRP came in. Demand-driven MRP builds on MRP. It builds on theory of constraints. It builds on lean. The subtle difference is you still use forecast to calculate your buffers, to calculate your average daily usage, and you actually do a real-time sensing. Today, we have technology where I can actually know that a sales order is going to come in the next 1 month. So it has a lower horizon. It is more accurate in terms of demand sensing. And you have red, blue, and yellow zones. So to give a color coding that if something is green, you're fine. Something is yellow, you better watch out. And red is something that's so that's again, it sits on top of all this. So whatever you have done, you don't have to throw it away. But that's again an algorithm which actually holds a lot of promise. Not yet proven fully, but it holds a lot of promise.
I think that was pretty self-explanatory and just loaded with content there because there were things that I was like, okay, I know this, but I didn't know this. And I think everyone else who was listening to understood that there's so much that we have to learn in inventory management. So I'm glad that you went on with the description of the same. Thank you for that. Moving on a little, let's just talk about the KPIs. What are the most important KPIs to look out for in inventory management?
I think again that's a brilliant $1 million question. Lot of reams and reams of paper have been written on this, and typically happens is inventory guys are the bad guys because you are holding so much of capital. But do understand, as I was discussing again and again, that KPIs should be organization KPIs. The departmental KPIs are fine as long as they align with the organization objective, because procurement's KPI will be to minimize the number of times they order. So they will always try to order in bulk. But it's the inventory guy which takes the hit. So that's where I think a judicious, it has to be a joint KPI where you know that this is how I do a global optima rather than local. So the basic KPI which I have seen is mostly the inventory turns, very, very prominent in how fast you move your inventory. So essentially, you look at what is your average cost of sales, and you divide it by your inventory to arrive at so many terms. Now, it's a very good measure. It's a working measure, but you cannot just apply the same thing for all across industry. For an FMCG, inventory turn has to be fast because where the shelf life and soap, shampoos have to move fast. But for a white goods, I think if you are expecting that kind of an inventory turn, that is a strict no-no. So it varies from industry to industry. So inventory turns is one, I think that's a very, very important KPI. Second is your inventory aging. Now, if you look at it, ideally everything should be first in, first out. Doesn't happen in real world. And sometimes it so happens that if it is an import, you still need, will come in first, but maybe go in last. So again, the aging also has to be looked at it. What is the value? What is the shelf life? What is the lead time? So don't just blindly assume that just because it has come in first, it has to go out. So it has always has to be a mix. So that's the second one when people have looked. Third is your obsolescence. Now, if you're, I have seen companies which actually typically happens in a make to order scenario where you have started building a product and there's an order cancellation. Now, every time you cannot really fight with your customer to say that I cannot cancel this order. Sometimes you have to accept it. And there are cases when you're not able to divert that order, and then it's in your stock, it shows up. You cannot do anything about it. It has to be scrapped. So that is again one aspect as an organization. If you have more standard parts and the more if you can divert your work in progress to multiple products at every stage, I think that is another KPI which is very, very useful for any company. So net, I think people use now don't use too many KPIs, because I know people think that because I'm using 8, 10 KPIs. No, use 2, 3, 4, and I think do it well, and you will be able to handle.
Right, that would be that. I think that's like the suggestion when it comes to entire supply chain. We have all been trying to look at KPIs, like you said, again from a very localized perspective, and it kind of is like a bigger trouble, especially when it comes to inventory. And yes, I love the fact that you talked about the work in progress inventory. That is something that if you're constantly working towards the reduction of the same, but then again, that's such a trade-off. you know uh I think trade-off is one of the most commonly used word in supply chain management and inventory management.
Commonly used, misused, whichever, whichever way you put it.
Correct. Right. So, moving further, I mean, I know we touched a little bit on this, but there is a direct correlation between inventory and the customer satisfaction level, the service level. Let's just kind of elaborate on that further.
I think again, great question, because we store inventory because we want to be responsive. Now, typically, let me explain how do we look at supply chain. Now, people thought that a supply chain is either efficient or responsive. So efficient means you are a low cost producer, you are doing it really well. You really are not really worried about your customer response. Customer wants it in 2 days, but if you try to do it in 2 days, you will have to do a air shipment. In that case, you will incur more money. You are not being efficient. So you will still use maybe the railways or the waterways, and it reaches the customer in 4 days. You have been efficient, but you are not responsible. Customer wanted 2 days. Again, customer will demand maybe an hourly, but you don't have to give in uh, to all the demands of the customer, because a lot of times I've seen people think, yes, customer is king, customer, we are here because our customers are giving us business, but to understand that sometimes customers become unreasonable, and if you don't push back, I think you will only hit your bottom line will be actually hit. So that's again a choice. Again, which kind of customer you will accept some of these unreasonable demands, which is not, again, that's again, it has to be worked together. So now a responsive supply chain is something customer wants in one day, I give it him in say 18 hours. So for that, I need to have ready-made stock, or if it is service, I need to have somebody who is closer to the customer who can go immediately. So if I'm storing inventory or I am actually creating additional buffer, I'm actually incurring more money. So I am, in this case, I am responsive, but I am not efficient because I have incurred more money. But today's supply chain, it has to be both. It has to be efficient, it has to be responsive. So one good way of doing, people have tried it, is you postpone your inventory closer to the customer. Classic example, Asian Paints. Again, if you go to any of the Asian Paints today, ask for any color, they will mix and match and give it to you. The same thing if you go, if you had gone in 1990s or 1980s, they don't have the color. They will say, we will have to make it and give it to you. So 3 months, 6 months lead time. So now that people have, it's still for the company, for Asian Paints, it's still a make to stock. They are efficient, but they have been responsive. So people are moving to an adaptive supply chain, which is because everybody is trying to be both. Not every industry can do that, because for airlines, you cannot be both, because it's the lead time is very high. But things have improved because now you have 3D printing, which has actually reduced the cycle time of prototyping. The costs have come down because some of parts you will make once in your life, and why do you have to invest in an expensive die and mold? So 3D printing, I think, has solved some of these problems. So even if I say the airline industry, that has still become a little more adaptive, but the nature of the industry is in shipbuilding. You cannot really make a ship in a one day. So it's it's just not possible. The industry is different. So whenever you're looking at a customer responsiveness, you look at industry by industry. Not every industry will have the same kind, and don't expect that, because a food, the delivery, the customer responsiveness has to be very, very good. Not vis-a-vis, say, an automobile or something like that. So that's very, very critical, that you look at the industry which you are in. And everybody is trying to have a customer experience, but customer experience doesn't mean that it's faster delivery. You can still have a delayed delivery, but if you are creating something, an impact, the customer is still willing to wait. For example, iPhone, Apple announces that we will launch. People wait, people don't go to anybody else. So that's, I think, so marketing, inventory, sales, everybody has to work together to make this happen.
I think this is where supply chain management gets so exciting and interesting. Besides there being like a lot of analysis that go has to go in the background. It cannot just be a purely quantitative analysis. There has to be an element of qualitative, point of view. And I really love that you brought that up. And customization is the key. Customization of your choices and particular, I'm talking about customization here, like how you mentioned that for different industry, the responsiveness and the efficiency also has to differ. So I think in supply chain we cannot kind of forget the context we are working in,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
because if we forget that context, we pretty much will take a bad decision and nobody wants that.
Very much. Very much.
Right. So, so towards the end of this, I have like this question. So we all went through the whole COVID-19 pandemic. In the beginning, we faced a lot of our pipeline inventory running out. So that is what I saw. But then there were two thought processes there. There were two kinds of impacts I saw. So I was in the UK and they had completely run out of everything. You know, it was a crazy mess. I came back to India. We were somehow not that impacted. None of our supplies were ever impacted. At least I'm talking about the urban cities in both the places. Obviously, it's an apples to apples comparison. I don't know why that happened. I'm still kind of hustling on that question that why did we run out of our pipeline inventory during the COVID-19 pandemic? We are a globalized supply chain. We are supposed to have much more, pipeline inventory. And why wasn't, or is it just like a false illusion that I have that the urban India was not exactly impacted as much as in the UK, or particularly in the Europe? I saw one country. So, what's your take on that?
I think that's a great question. See, if you look at it, UK and India, if I compare, UK again, they have more of these retail chains. They have more of this online ordering. They have more of these brands which were actually catering to it. So once the lockdown was announced, the production actually halted. But in India, if you look at it, there was this our ubiquitous kirana stores, which actually helped us tide the crisis. Small because 75-80% of India is our entrepreneurs and small entrepreneurs, and that is where I think we never ran out of supply because initially when e-commerce was not allowed to operate, the factories were closed. These are the kirana shops which actually saved us. So that's why we did not run out of inventory. Second thing is it's the kind of demand which we have. For example, if I say based on our society, based on our the habits which we have, the kind of goods which we consume, I think everything is actually produced in India. But unlike in UK, where a lot of these things have to be imported, and once the borders were closed, that is where we saw some shortage. India suffered a similar thing in pharmaceutical, where actually 70% of APIs, the active product ingredient, that is nothing but the raw material for your formulation. It comes from China. So that is one sector where we suffered because China had closed its borders. But otherwise, if you say if it is our grocery, if it is say our shampoos, if it is our soaps, if it is say our everything we had within us. Only thing the bigger brands stopped producing, but it was the smaller brands, not so known brands, which helped us. But what happened is towards the middle of the pandemic, there was a shift because there was no production. These unknown brands suffered because they had run out of stock, and the bigger brands were still able to actually cater. So the household actually prices increased because people had to shift to brands, and that's where people had to spend more from a household point of view. So that's a shift which happened towards the middle. And now that everything is not yet open because the MNCs, they can actually get their own vehicles to ferry their people. But it is the smaller brands where people have to rely on their own transportation because public transportation was not running. So these are the unknown brands. These actually suffered towards the middle and the end. But the initial days, I think, uh, because a better brand was not available, people shifted to these brands and they were there in plenty. So that is why I think we still tided over. But yes, there was still panic buying because of some of the medicines, because somebody was saying that immunity is important. So one fine day, I found that all the stockists have ran out of Zincovid, which has, I don't know, these kind of perceptions, some of them was artificial because people were trying to hoard, but understand that as a humanity, if we have to survive, we have to survive together. For example, if the vaccine, I take it, you don't take it, I am still at risk. So that's where I think people did not. Again, I'm trying to be a little uh, digressing from the topic, but again, I want to reiterate that it's very, very important that when we look at even at supply chains, we look at it from a holistic perspective, not look at a piecemeal approach, because that is not going to help anyone.
Right, very much so. And sometimes it's I think that's exactly what happened with me as well. I think in the beginning we weren't even realizing that we were in the middle of a pandemic. Frankly, it was just like, okay, this thing will pass. And I remember I went down to the shop downstairs. It was very close to my house back in Swindon, and I just went and I asked for like toilet paper, and he had like a big hoarding that said not giving out more than two toilet papers to one person. I said, oh, okay, why is that? Just me being completely ignorant. I'm glad that you bring that up because it is in these times that we are reminded that we have to act much more civilized. And many of us did not. And I think that's exactly where things got pretty messed up and it became like a big deal. And I remember I was at the airport coming back to India before the borders were closing in that situation. And the entire international student fraternity was there on that airport. I'd said Heathrow. And I didn't have a mask at that point. And I was scared. Because I could not buy a mask. Was not available until one of the person there, random stranger, thought that I might and I should wear a mask. He said, "Please go ahead." And I'm like, "Random stranger, thank you." So I think these were most testing times, and pretty much not just like testing us as humans, as a society, but also testing our supply chains till the end. And all the talks of resilience were actually tested and seen what exactly happens. So I'm glad that you brought that aspect up, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So great. I mean, of course, it does not end the conversation on inventory management, at least in supply chain 101. It's the basic, the first set of things that we could have talked about. So thank you so much for your time, Sandeep, sir. And I think this has been such an exciting series for us as well, creating open source education. And this being the very first one on supply chain. And there's so much more great work that we can do with you, with your experience. I'm a little sad that this series is ending, but I'm also excited about the other things you might just do in the future. So thank you so much, Sandeep, sir, for joining us for this series, recording that with us, taking our time on a weekend, and let's just do great stuff together.
Thank you so much. And again, as I said, we just touched the fundamentals. We have many, 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 many more to cover. So definitely we will work together because again, I believe that at the end of the day, as professionals, what impact we have done for the community, and if it actually inspires 10 more people to do something, I think I will have a fulfilling life. So that's how I look at it.
Perfect, great. That's exactly how even we want to look at it and have been looking at it. Even if one person is able to get some content, substantial content out of the content that we're preparing, and it helps them in their career, why not? So, this has been an exciting series for us. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will definitely come back soon with something more for you. Meanwhile, subscribe to the channel because we'll be posting a lot of content here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.